Hey everyone, and welcome back to Practical CSS Grid. This is exercise number 4. I hope you spent some time in exercise number 3 breaking the grid pretty horrifically and also creating some really cool looking asymmetric grids. We're moving away from that typical card grid for exercise 4, and we're going to use grid to lay out our content in possibly one of the most ubiquitous design aspects on the web, and that is the full page grid or the full page banner with your H1, your H2, and a big, bold, full height or at least almost full height background image. Now, traditionally, these oftentimes have the big background image and then centered content or maybe slightly off-centered content, but everything in kind of one container overlaying on the image. That is not an interesting design anymore. That is a very, very typical design. And now we can actually use something like grid to take that old, stale design aspect and turn it into something art directed and cool. In this example, we've got this really interesting room design from maybe an architecture magazine or an interior design magazine. And we are laying out a big hammerhead and then a subheadline with a byline inside of that and actually matching it up with that background. So the first thing that I want to do in this exercise is to show you how this would have been done in previous generations of web layout. Now, I've done a little bit of the work for you already in the default CSS, unlike what I've done in the previous exercises. We've done some art direction around the text itself. We've matched up some colors from the background. We've put a drop shadow on it. And I've gone ahead and I've pulled that image in as a background image on the element. And now let's take a look at the HTML, because what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few different ways we could lay that out with the simplest HTML possible. So we've got a section with a class of banner. We have a banner headline, a banner subhead, and a banner secondary. And we're going to take this and we're going to center align it on the page, and we're going to have it in that kind of traditional flow. So first and foremost, I need to specify some sort of height on my banner, because obviously this is not looking too good. So I could do this in one of two ways. I could specify a height itself. So I could say height, 100 VH for 100 viewport units. Come back over here and we've got a full height banner. And then I could actually come in and I could position my content inside of that. Oftentimes what we would do in this is we put a wrapper around this, div banner content. And then we're going to actually position that with flex, as a matter of fact. So we're going to come in, we're going to say, all right, we've got our banner content, and our banner itself is going to be display flex, and we're just going to say margin auto on that content. And what flex allows for is the vertical and horizontal centering with margin auto instead of just one direction. So that's relatively simple. It gives us the centered content. Sometimes you'd see maybe a background or a slightly darker overlay behind it. You have a background color of RGBA 0, 0, 0, maybe 0.3 for a slightly transparent background on that. And then you put padding inside that. Padding to rem. And this is a fairly common design pattern. It is, however, not particularly interesting. Another way we could do this is we could look at centering it with padding on the banner. So instead of having this be display flex and having our margin auto, we'll keep margin auto and we'll say this has a width of 75%. And then we can actually come in here, instead of a height being set, we could set a padding, and we'll set a top and bottom padding of, let's say, 10 VH and a left and right of 0. And then we have a banner that grows with its content. So let's go ahead and say maybe 25 VH. So now, depending on the amount of content we have, that grows this area. Now, again, this is all accomplishing the same thing of centering text on here. We could also have it be bottom aligned and have it, instead of being 25 top and bottom, it could be 50 top and something like, 2 rem bottom, and that would allow for a bottom aligned banner text. All that's great, and I'm not going to complain if anyone uses that design pattern. It is tried and true and works pretty well across the web. But as we move forward, more and more people are going to be experimenting with asymmetric looks and different art-directed banner styles. You may as well be at the forefront as well. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change this over to grid. And we're going to revert all these changes that we just made. So no more padding and no more banner content whatsoever, because we are not going to introduce a new layer of markup in our HTML just to accomplish a little bit of design. All right, so now that we have reverted, let's go ahead and save that in and refresh the page. We're back to where we were at the beginning. We're now going to define a grid on our banner, and I'm going to try and make this as flexible as possible so that we can use this for different art direction depending on what our background image is. So instead of actually defining the grid based on the current content, I want to define a flexible 5-column, 5-row grid. So I do need to go ahead and set a height. So I'm going to set a min height on this of 100 VH. And then I'm going to go ahead and display grid our element. And then I'm going to define our grid template rows and columns. So grid template columns. And we're going to do a repeat function on these, just like we've been doing, 5, 1FR. And we're going to do that also for our grid template rows. And this is going to give us a very flexible grid to work off of and create new art-directed styles. So we're going to go ahead and save that in. We're going to view the page in Firefox, and you can see our 3 elements inside that are now laid out on the first 3 grid columns. So let's go ahead and view this grid, and you can see it's laid out in almost squares along the X and the Y axis, and this is going to allow us to place specific elements in specific grid cells across the board. And if you'll remember from our example, we've got this subhead lined up with this line over here, and we're putting left and right, merging those together for our headline and our subhead. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how we're going to do that. And in Firefox's Grid Inspector, you can see how you have the line numbers for each of these. And we're going to actually align these items based on those line numbers. So let's go ahead and go over to the code, and I want to specify our banner headline. So let's go ahead and place our banner headline on our grid. So class banner headline. And just like before when we were spanning things, we're going to specify our grid column and our grid row. But in this case, we're going to use a slightly different syntax. We're going to use grid columns like we did before. And then instead of saying span, we're going to specify a starting value and an ending value for where we want this to be. So I know that in our design, I want that big headline to be around grid line 4 for the column. So I can go ahead and specify that for how it's going to lay out. So I say grid line 4, and then where I want it to end. And so I put a slash in between, so 4 space slash, and then the numeric value of where I want that to end. And in this case, I want to go ahead and span the 4th column and the 5th column. So I give it grid line 6, which happens after that 5th column, and it's going to automatically place it there. So we'll come in, we'll refresh the page, and as you can see, now it's in that top right. Now, why is it in that top right, you might ask? It is in that top right and not down below because we haven't specified the same placement as for the row as we did for the column. So now we need to go ahead and bump that down into the place we expect it to be. And we'll do that with the exact same syntactic style. We're going to say grid row, and we're going to specify which rows we want to fall on. So let's take a look at our end design, and it looks to be roughly in the 3rd row. So let's take a look and we'll see, all right, grid line 1, grid line 2, and grid line 3. As you can see, you can also specify by negatives, but we don't need to worry about that. On the left-hand side, you'll see grid column 3. So we're going to say this spans from grid row 3, and I want it to end at grid row 4. So let's take a look and see if that's gotten us pretty close. Yeah, that's roughly how we'd expect it to be. It is lined up, not with that photo yet, because we're going to have to do some background positioning on that, but it is now in roughly the spot we expect it to be in. So let's go ahead and try to position the subheadline in the same way we were doing it before. So go back over to our code, grab our class from our HTML, banner underscore underscore subhead, and we're going to define where this belongs. We're going to do that with grid column and grid row exactly like we did for headline. So grid column, and let's take a look at where we want that to be. So in our finished product, it's in one column before our headline. So in our grid inspector, you can see grid column line 3 is where that starts. So we're going to place that at grid column line 3, and then I can either specify take it to 4, or I can just leave it at grid column 3 and it knows to span only one column. So let's take a look. It is now in that third column, and now we need to move it down using our grid rows as well. So we'll come in here and we'll say grid row, and we'll take a look at roughly where we want that to be. We want it to match up, let's see, it needs to extend up outside of where the headline is. So that means we need it in one previous row spanning down to the end of where the headline is. So in our case, it'll be spanning from grid line 2 to grid line 4. Grid row 2 space / 4. Take a look at where we are. And now you can see it's not exactly right, but we're getting there, right? It is now spanning those two columns. Let's go ahead and finish our placement and get our byline directly underneath our headline in the exact same way. We're going to grab that class from our HTML. We're going to put it in our CSS as a selector. And we're going to specify our grid column. And we know that we want to line up with our banner headline. So we know we want it to be from 4 to 6. And we know that we want our grid row to be one after our headline. So we want it to start at the ending line of our headline, 4, space / we want to go to the 5th line as well. We'll save that in, save it, and now you can see it finishes right after that headline. It comes in right after that. So now all we have to do is figure out exactly how to get the alignment right with what we're looking for. And so we'll take a look at where we're looking, and we want our text for our subhead to be right aligned, and we want it to be at the bottom alignment inside of its grid cell. So come back over, and we're going to go ahead and give it text align right. Align right. That'll get us a little closer. And then we also want it to align itself to the end of its grid cell. And just like we've done in the past, we're going to use the align items property, and we're going to just tell it to be at the end. It helps if you use the right property, the align self property. Save that in. There we go. Now it is at the end, and it lines up pretty closely with that H1. Now we'll switch on back over to our finished product, and we look like we're getting pretty close. Let's go ahead and go full screen on this. And you know what? It's looking pretty darn good. The vertical spacing is a little off, but I think that's kind of to do more with where we're currently at than anything else. And yeah, this is lining up pretty good. So what we're going to do next is take a look at how we can art direct some other background images as well. So we have a good ending point for this. We have a decently art directed banner placement. We're using our layout as a first-class citizen in the design of this cover area. So we want to take a look at a different style of background photo, and we want to change our layout based on the way that background photo looks. We want to do some first-class art direction on the web. And so we have this excellent photo in the background here of a woman kind of peering through some dense foliage. And I think this is actually a really great photo from Unsplash. It's stored in your images directory, but there's also, now we're moving on to exercise 4A, or maybe it's 4B, we'll see, inside of your examples. Yeah, 4A, flexible banners. And so we've got a finish and an end, just like we have in the past. And here you can see that we are starting at roughly the same CSS that we had at the end of exercise 4. And we have all the same banner, headline, subhead, secondary. Our markup has not changed, only the text inside of it has changed. And the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to redefine our simple styles for our visuals with some new text styles that fit this theme a little better. So let's go ahead and paste that in here. You can see we're bringing in a cursive font, and we'll go in here and you can see now we have a white text, we have slightly different font sizes, and while this layout is fine, it doesn't exactly match up with the way that this photo works. There's a great eye line that we can utilize to draw the user's eye from the woman's face over to our headline. So we're going to attempt to use CSS Grid to create a nice looking use of white space inside of our banner. And you can see we've got this great eye line happening between this woman's eye in the photo right to our headline. And then we've got our image source down here at the bottom left, tucked out of the way, and our subhead down here as well. And we're kind of trying to lead the user around and give them a sense that this is a special story. So we're going to go ahead and move over to our code, and we're going to start laying this out in the exact same way that we did before. So I'm going to move to our banner headline and our banner subhead, and we're going to start laying them out along the way that we want this to end up. So our banner headline is going to come in at the far right hand edge, and it appears to be spanning from roughly the first column to, I'm going to guess, the third column when I'm looking at this design. And so I'm going to go into our CSS, and I'm going to change, just in CSS, no markup changes, our grid column from 4/6 to 5/6, because we want to be in that last row, or that last column. And I want our grid row to span from the first column to the fourth. And that should get us columns 1, or rows 1, 2, and 3 inside of that. And then as you can see, we still have an align self end on this, which we can keep or not keep. We'll take a look at how this ends up looking in our finished product. So let's take a look at Firefox again. And you can see over here on the right-hand side, we now have this stacked up. And you can see align self end does not make any sense for what we're looking for here. We want it to be a little higher up on the page. And so for that, we can utilize align self start or center. Let's take a look at both of those and see which one we like a little better. So center's down there. I think I like it appearing at the start first. Or so let's take a look and see why exactly it's not where we expect it to be. We've got our div class banner, we've got our h1, and let's see. Because our grid row is still set 2-4, and we want it to be 1-4. There we go. All right, so now it appears up there, and you'll also notice our background image changed size for the cover as well, and that's because our text jumped in size, and we're using fractional units for our rows. And so as this takes up more rows, the size of the rows themselves get to decrease. And so by changing it from spanning those 2 rows to spanning 3 rows, we've actually decreased the amount of space it has to take up. And I think in the end, if we have it spanning that many, we'll go ahead and have it be align self center. And again, a lot of this is kind of a taste perspective, or working together with your designers to figure out exactly how you want all this to lay out. So let's go ahead and view our banner grid, and you can see, let's change that color. Let's change it over to a nice light pink. There we go. You can see it now is up here, and it's actually fitting entirely in that section. So I think I actually want to increase the number of rows it's taking up so that I can get a little bit more of a centered design out of it. So instead of rows 1/4, I'm going to space it 1/5. And you can see I get a little extra space now because of the way these rows are sized. So we now also need to move our byline and our subhead down to the bottom corners. And we can do that in the exact way we've been doing it. We're going to come over here into our code, and on our subhead, we want this to be grid row 5/6. And we want it to be grid column probably 4/6. So now it's appearing down there, and we probably want to actually take up one more column as well to keep it on one line at most screen sizes. So we'll have it span from 3 to 6 instead. And there it is at the bottom right, and now we just need to take this byline and turn it into our caption at the bottom left. And instead of using positive lines to do this, I want to show you all how to use those negative lines that you've been seeing in our grid inspector. And as you can see down here in our rows, that there is a -1 line here and a -2 line here. So we can come in, and on our banner secondary, we can specify our column to be 1 and our grid row to be -1. And that's going to place it down there along the -1 area. And you can see, because it doesn't actually work back up, it's actually adding a new row underneath it. That is an unexpected consequence. So we actually want this to be -2 for our grid row. There it is. And now we want to change our alignment from align self start to align self end. And you can see it is now down there at the bottom. And we can take a look at our finished product and see that we are pretty close to what we were looking for. We have big text up here at the top right with the eyeline match, and then that's going to lead us down into our subhead. We're going to keep our caption tucked nicely away over in this corner, and then a user can get right on with their reading of this story. So my challenge to you is to take this idea and create an exercise 4B for yourself. And inside of our assets folder, we actually have a set of images. Pick one of these images and play off of this idea. Find a good match for how you want to do your layout in CSS Grid to make the most sense with one of these images. And I'll see you in exercise 5 after you've done your experimentation.